Started like any regular morning. Sunlight pouring over the city, buses rumbling through intersections, people hustling through their routines, unaware that someone's life was about to change forever. In a quiet courtroom tucked away in a corner of the city, a black man in a sharp navy blue suit stood before the bench, calm, composed, and silent. His name, Marcus Allen. Most people in the room didn't know him beyond the case number attached to his file. To them, he was just another face, another name on the docket. But Marcus wasn't just anyone, and the judge sitting high on the bench was about to find that out the hard way. Judge Whitaker, a man known for his stern courtroom demeanor and even sterner judgments, looked over his glasses at Marcus with a mix of impatience and indifference. He glanced at the citation in front of him. Some minor traffic infraction, something barely worth a second thought. But as he scanned Marcus's appearance, something shifted in his expression. Maybe it was the color of Marcus's skin. Maybe it was unconscious bias, or maybe it was something deeper. Either way, the room could feel it. The judge didn't ask many questions. He barely looked up from the paperwork before announcing a fine that raised eyebrows, even among those who had seen much worse in that courtroom. Marcus didn't flinch. He thanked the judge, nodded respectfully, and turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, he paused, turned back, and walked slowly toward the bench. The room held its breath. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "before I leave, I think it's only fair to introduce myself fully. My name is Marcus Allen. I'm a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice." The silence was deafening. The judge's face changed instantly. What was cold and dismissive only seconds ago became nervous and unsure. He cleared his throat, suddenly looking very small behind that towering desk. You could see the calculations running through his mind, the implications, the mistake, the spotlight he had just brought on himself. But Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers, he just stood there, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. And then he walked out. That was only the beginning. On the other side of the city, something entirely different was happening. A teenage boy named Jamal was on the city bus heading home from school. He had his headphones on, a beat playing low in his ears, and a heavy backpack resting on his lap. Life had been tough lately. His mom was working 2 jobs, he barely saw his dad, and money was always tight. But Jamal never complained. He kept his head down, stayed out of trouble, and tried to do right by the people around him. As the bus filled up, a pregnant woman stepped on board. She looked tired, maybe even a little overwhelmed. Without a second thought, Jamal stood up and offered her his seat. She hesitated at first, surprised by the gesture, but then she smiled, grateful, and sat down. They didn't talk much after that, just a quiet exchange of smiles. But as she got off the bus a few stops later, she turned and handed him a folded note. "Read it later," she said gently, and then she was gone. Jamal slipped the note into his pocket, not thinking much of it. But when he finally unfolded it later that night, his world stopped. Inside was a message that would change the course of his life. Not just words, but an opportunity, a door opening in a way he never expected. A complete stranger, touched by his simple act of kindness, was about to become the bridge to something far bigger than Jamal could ever imagine. 2 stories, 2 moments, both rooted in something deeper than what was seen on the surface. A judge forced to face his own bias. A teenager rewarded for his kindness. And in the middle of it all, consequences, revelations, and the ripple effects of how we treat each other when no one's watching. But this is just the start. Because what Marcus did after that courtroom moment would shine a light into places that many try to keep in the dark. And Jamal's journey, it's about to take a turn that even he couldn't have predicted. So stay right here. You're not going to want to miss what happens next. Marcus Allen didn't always wear a suit. He grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a neighborhood where you learned early how to navigate the world with your eyes open and your mouth shut. His mother worked night shifts at a hospital, and his father, a quiet man with strong hands, ran a small repair shop that barely kept the lights on. Marcus was the youngest of 3, and the one who always asked the most questions. about fairness, about right and wrong, about why things seemed so different depending on which side of the city you were born in. By the time he was 16, Marcus had already seen more than most grown men. He'd seen friends get pulled into the system, some for things they didn't do, others for mistakes they couldn't undo. He'd seen his older brother go to jail, and his sister work herself to the bone just to get a shot at college. But Marcus had a different kind of fire in him. He didn't want to run from the system. He wanted to face it, understand it, change it. That fire led him to law school, and then into one of the toughest federal prosecutor programs in the country. He didn't talk much about where he came from, not because he was ashamed, but because he didn't want anyone mistaking his past for a weakness. So when he stood in that courtroom, facing a judge who couldn't see past the color of his skin, all of that history came rushing back, not in anger, but in quiet strength, because Marcus wasn't just standing there for himself. He was standing there for every young man who ever got sized up and dismissed before saying a single word. After he left the courtroom that day, he didn't file a complaint. He didn't call a press conference. Instead, he went back to work. But something in him had shifted, and he knew it wasn't the last time he'd cross paths with that judge. Not by a long shot. Across town, Jamal sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the note again. His room was small, cluttered with schoolbooks and posters of old basketball legends. The lamp flickered softly in the corner, casting shadows that moved when he breathed. The note was still in his hands, worn at the edges from where he'd folded and unfolded it over and over again. It wasn't just a thank you. It wasn't just kind words. The woman had written something that didn't quite feel real. Your kindness reminded me of my own son. He passed away last year. I want to help you if you're open to it. I work in a mentorship program for youth, and we have scholarship openings. If you're interested, reach out. This might be the door you've been waiting for. There was a phone number scribbled at the bottom. No name, just a number. Jamal read it again and again. His heart beat a little faster each time. He hadn't told his mom yet. She was asleep in the next room, exhausted from a double shift. He knew she'd worry, maybe think it was a scam. But something about the way the woman spoke, the look in her eyes, it felt real. Still, questions bounced around his head. Why him? Why now? Could this really be something? Or was he just imagining a way out of a life that felt like it had no exits? The next morning, Marcus sat at his desk in his downtown office, files stacked around him like walls. He was reviewing a case involving corruption in a city department, one that might reach all the way to the mayor's office. It wasn't the kind of case you rushed. It was delicate, political, and full of risk. But Marcus liked the challenge. He liked peeling back the layers of truth, even when it made people uncomfortable. His phone buzzed, unknown number. He stared at it for a second before picking up. Marcus Allen. There was a pause on the other end, then a voice, low, uncertain. Mr. Allen, I'm not sure if I should be calling, but I was told you might be someone who could help me understand what happened in a courtroom yesterday. Marcus leaned back slowly. The voice belonged to a young defense attorney, new to the circuit, still learning the ropes. She had been in the gallery during his hearing the day before. She said something about the judge's behavior not sitting right with her, that she'd seen him do similar things to others. Quietly, subtly, always with just enough distance to avoid suspicion. She wasn't trying to stir trouble, she said, but she couldn't ignore what she saw. That night, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, the note still in his pocket. His mom was folding laundry nearby, humming softly. The news played low in the background. Another story about city crime rates. Another reminder of the odds stacked against kids like him. He pulled the note out slowly. Ma? He asked. She looked up, tired but attentive. I gave up my seat on the bus yesterday to a pregnant woman. She gave me this. He handed her the note. She read it once, then again, her face tightening as she tried to make sense of it. Do you think it's real? He asked. She didn't answer right away, just sat there staring at the words, fingers tracing the edges of the paper. I don't know. she finally said. "But if someone wants to help you because you were kind, maybe that's something worth checking out." Jamal nodded. He didn't know it yet, but that note was connected to something much bigger than he could see. What neither of them knew, what no one knew, was that the woman on the bus wasn't just a stranger with a good heart. She was connected to a judge, the same judge who had dismissed Marcus without a second thought, and her name was Whitaker. The story was starting to unfold in ways none of them could predict. A prosecutor with a purpose, a teen with a chance, and a judge whose actions were no longer going unnoticed. What happens when the lines start to blur? Between justice and judgment, between kindness and consequence. And how far can one moment reach into the lives of others? The pieces were moving. And the truth? It was coming. But not yet. Not just yet. Marcus sat at the far end of the quiet cafe, a black coffee cooling in front of him as he scanned the report pages on his tablet. His mind, though, wasn't focused on the case files. It kept drifting back to Judge Whitaker. The courtroom incident replayed in pieces. His tone, the rushed judgment, the fine, the way the judge hadn't even bothered to ask a single real question. And now, a young attorney was reaching out, claiming this wasn't the first time it had happened. Marcus had always believed that justice wasn't just about laws. It was about people, about how the system treated them, saw them, labeled them. He had built his reputation on being thorough and fair, but he also knew how many cracks ran beneath the surface of the system he worked in. This judge, he suspected, wasn't just having a bad day. This was a pattern, and patterns meant something could be done about it. Back in his office, he started pulling files. He asked his clerk quietly to flag any cases over the last year that involved Judge Whitaker and defendants of color. The more he looked, the more things began to stand out. Similar language in rulings, harsher fines, denied motions, subtle patterns, nothing that screamed corruption or discrimination outright, but enough to make you pause. Meanwhile, across the city, Jamal stood in the front hallway of a tall glass building. He was holding his backpack with both hands, nerves bubbling in his chest. The mentorship program office was on the 14th floor. He hadn't told anyone but his mom that he was going. She gave him her blessing but reminded him to be cautious. "Not everyone who smiles at you wants to help," she had said. Still, Jamal had a feeling, deep down, that this was something real. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and he stepped out into a bright office space that didn't feel anything like the world he came from. The woman who greeted him smiled warmly. It was her, the woman from the bus. Her name was Lauren, and yes, she confirmed she was indeed part of a private mentorship program for at-risk youth, funded by donors, quietly operated. No social media, no flashy brochures, just one-on-one support for kids who needed it most. Lauren led him to a small meeting room, offered him something to drink, and asked him to talk about his life, school, his goals, what he wanted for his future. Jamal talked carefully at first, testing the waters, but Lauren listened, really listened. She didn't interrupt or judge. She just nodded and let him speak. And for the first time in a long time, Jamal felt like someone actually saw him. What he didn't know was that Lauren had her own reasons for taking such a strong interest in him. Her son, Evan, had been a lot like Jamal. Quiet, thoughtful, trying to stay on the right path despite the chaos around him. Evan had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. Since then, Lauren had been trying to find some way to honor his memory, to make sure that kids like Evan didn't get lost in the shuffle. And when Jamal gave up his seat on that bus, something clicked in her heart. Back downtown, Marcus finally got a meeting with the young defense attorney. Her name was Rachel. They met in a small office near the courthouse, and she brought with her a folder filled with notes, case summaries, statements from clients who had faced Judge Whitaker. Some had stories that sounded eerily similar, unexpected fines, strange comments, rulings that didn't line up with the evidence. None of it was solid proof on its own, but when stacked together, it painted a troubling picture. "What do you want to do with all of this?" Rachel asked, leaning forward. "I don't know yet," Marcus admitted. But if this is real, it can't keep happening. Not while I'm here. He didn't say it out loud, but part of him also felt responsible. If someone like him, someone with a badge and a title, could be dismissed so quickly in a courtroom, what was happening to those who didn't have his power? Meanwhile, Lauren made a call from her office later that evening. She hesitated before dialing the number in her contacts. It rang twice before being picked up. "Judge Whitaker," she said softly. "Lauren," he replied, his voice flat but formal. "Didn't expect to hear from you. I need to talk to you, not as a colleague, as a mother." There was a long silence then. "Go ahead. I met a young man this week. He reminds me of Evan. His name's Jamal. I'm going to sponsor him through the program." Another pause. Then, "You do what you want, Lauren. I know who you are in court," she said, her voice shaking just a little. "But I also know you're better than that." The call ended without another word. What Lauren didn't realize was that Whitaker had already started to feel the walls closing in. Marcus wasn't the only one watching now. A senior justice review committee had recently received an anonymous tip, and internal auditors had quietly started reviewing case rulings. Word was spreading, and though Whitaker had survived scrutiny before, this time felt different. Jamal left the mentorship office with a folder in his hand. Inside, a short list of colleges that worked with the program, names of mentors, and a small prepaid card to help with school supplies. It wasn't a miracle, but it was a start. As he walked down the street toward the train station, his mind buzzed with questions. Could this really change his life? Or was it just a brief moment of hope in a city that often forgot kids like him? Marcus, later that night, stared out the high window of his apartment, city lights flickering in the distance. He thought about the system he worked for, the people it failed, the quiet harm that could hide in plain sight. And he wondered what it would take, what he would have to do to make something change. None of them knew that the storm was coming faster than they expected. The threads were pulling tighter. Jamal's connection to Lauren, Lauren's tie to the judge, Marcus's digging, Rachel's evidence. It was all circling around the same name, Judge Whitaker. And soon, the truth would no longer be something that could be buried. But for now, the silence held, the city buzzed, and the story was only beginning to unfold.